I want to ask you to do me a favor. I want to ask you to join me in giving a warm values voter welcome to my friend, Senator John McCain of Arizona.
Thank you to my friends and your stalwart servant leaders, Tony Perkins and General Jerry Boykin. I'd also like to thank Kathy Herod for the great work that she and the Center for Arizona Policy do to promoting our shared values. Indeed, thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you about some of our shared concerns in the world. I know you got a lot going on today. You're going to hear from many important speakers, including a number of candidates for President of the United States. I'm the warm-up act for Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham. So listening to a former unsuccessful candidate from 2 presidential elections ago, which is practically a century in Washington years, probably isn't your first priority. By the way, after I lost, I slept like a baby. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. So I mean it sincerely when I say thank you for your courtesy and for the privilege of addressing you on a subject close to my heart and yours, the cause of human dignity in a world plagued with too much tyranny, too much injustice, too much violence, too much suffering, with too much evil. That's a rather dark introduction to my remarks, and I don't want you to think I'm disheartened or resigned to a world where suffering and evil are always on the ascent. On the contrary, it's in the American character to see the good in things, to see the glass half full, to face adversity with hope and optimism. We must see plainly and fully the threats to our values in order to defeat them. But considering the remarkable global advances in our values have made in our lifetime alone, we should have confidence in their continuing power and progress. I have always believed, no matter how long it takes, how many setbacks are suffered, how resilient the forces of tyranny are, the righteous will prevail. Those who terrorize and persecute and destroy can be overcome with moral and physical courage. We are on the right side of history, and we have been since our founding fathers forged a government that existed not to preserve the privileges of a regime or a class, but to protect people's God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's also important to remember that our founding belief in inherent human dignity is not limited to our own society, to the experiences of Americans alone. We believe our political values to be universal. We believe that the dignity of all human life should be recognized and supported through shared respect and responsibilities. My friends, I've had differences of opinion over the years with former President Jimmy Carter, who is in our prayers as he suffers ill health with grace and courage. But he was never more right or wiser than when he observed that America didn't invent human rights. Human rights invented America. And our allegiance to our country can't be separated from allegiance to our founding ideals and our conviction that they are the birthright of all mankind. We can manage to retain our freedoms while other populations are denied them, but not the sense of virtue that we refer to as American exceptionalism, and that made our revolution a moral as well as a political and military crusade. Accepting the degradation in other countries of values we believe are God-given and universal is to relinquish some of our own humanity. The older we get, the more we realize that the pursuit of genuine happiness is so much more than the experience of pleasure. It requires us to serve causes greater than self-interest, causes that might encompass us but are not defined by our existence alone. I believe the same holds true for the conduct of nations as well as individuals, and no cause is greater than defending human dignity wherever it is threatened, at home or abroad. We are morally obliged to confront evil. That might seem obvious when it comes to terrorists who behead their innocent victims in front of cameras and murder us in our own country. But what is less obvious, in fact, what doesn't necessarily ring true to many Americans, is that confronting evil is a much broader responsibility than killing terrorists who are trying to kill us. It includes the responsibility not to turn a blind eye to threats to the peace and security of our friends and allies, and even to threats to people with whom we share nothing other than our own humanity. It includes opposing assaults on human dignity wherever they occur and whenever they occur. Our opposition cannot always be military, obviously, but it should always be clear in the conduct of our policies and our public and private diplomacy, in the material and rhetorical support we give the victims of tyranny, and in our relations and communications with their oppressors. There is no more fundamental right in a free society than the free practice of religion. No society that denies religious freedom can rightly claim to be good in some other way. And no person can be true to any faith that believes in the dignity of human life if they do not act to support those whose dignity is under assault because of their faith. Yet in countries around the world, human beings are imprisoned, and worse, for the crime of worshiping God in their own way. In some places, that's happening at the direction of government or with government's acquiescence. The United States should be first among all nations to denounce religious persecution in all its forms and locations, even when it takes place in nations with whom we have important and complicated relations, such as China and Saudi Arabia, for example. Of course, nowhere has religious persecution been more extreme, more brutal, than the persecution of Christians in the Middle East and North Africa at the hands of ISIS and other terrorist organizations. Whole Christian communities are being brutalized, murdered, driven from their ancestral homes, and destroyed in the land where the faith was born and first took root in the hearts of humanity. As yet, neither the administration, the government of Europe, or other allies have shown seriousness of purpose in devising effective responses to these atrocities. Promoting religious freedom should be in the forefront of our counterterrorism efforts. It should be central to our development programs in the region and in our efforts to build alliances with local and regional leaders who will oppose radical Islam ideologies and advocate tolerance and pluralism. Tony Perkins and I wrote an op-ed on the subject earlier this summer, and I ask your indulgence for doing one of the things politicians most love to do: quote ourselves. We wrote, "American support for religious liberty sends a potent and unmistakable message to threatened communities around the world. America is your friend. Such support builds enduring goodwill toward our country among those who would be leading their nations in the years ahead. And it reminds all observers, whether friendly or hostile, that the U.S. remains committed to a world where justice and human dignity are central to legitimate governance. The triumvirate of rights we proclaim in the Declaration of Independence encompass all other human rights. Of course, the right to life is the most sacred of all. No other rights exist without it, obviously. Naturally, then, our greatest moral obligation is to oppose the taking of innocent life. It is that paramount obligation that instructs our opposition to abortion. I know many Americans believe a child is not a human life until it's born. They are wrong. and we have a moral obligation to say so and defend the right to life of the most innocent. Contrary to conventional Washington wisdom, public support is growing for our position and will continue as more Americans are exposed to the cruelest realities of abortion and the apparent indifferences to suffering and loss of life exhibited by some leading abortion advocates. Opportunities to restrict abortion should improve, not as quickly as we want or as much, but I have to believe that Americans' sense of justice and humanity will prevail eventually. Senator Lindsey Graham, one of who I'm the warm-up act for, along with Senator Rubio and others. Senator Graham introduced a ban on abortions beyond the time a child in the womb can feel pain, which I strongly support. I know restricting abortions isn't sufficient, but it's progress. Fewer unborn children will perish. Senate Democrats blocked it from coming to a vote the other day. That's frustrating, but it won't be the final word. We'll be back again for as long as it takes until this compassionate, sincere measure receives the vote and support it deserves. Hopefully, we'll have a pro-life White House to work with soon. Defending innocent life should be a high priority in the conduct of foreign policy, too. Yet, time and again, the free world has been slow or inadequate in our responses to attempted genocides in the unfree world. We were slow in Cambodia, Rwanda, Srebrenica, Kosovo, Sudan, and elsewhere. We've been woefully ineffective to date in efforts to stop the horrors occurring in Syria, which include mass murder on the scale of genocide, the use of chemical weapons, millions of displaced, starving innocent people, and the most brutal, dehumanized form of terrorism we've yet witnessed, all because of a feckless foreign policy by the President of the United States. In response to all this violence and suffering and the dangers it poses to peace and security in the Middle East and our own security, the U.S. government has managed to periodically bomb ISIS targets, train about half a dozen moderate Syrian resistance fighters. Meanwhile, ISIS and other terrorist organizations, as well as Russia and Iran, continue to strengthen their position in that wretched, utterly destroyed country. The instability this is causing in the always dangerous Middle East is enormous and worsening. Add to that instability the fact that we have concluded an agreement with Iran that won't prevent it from eventually acquiring nuclear weapons, but will flow billions of dollars in revenues to a regime that is bent on dominating the Middle East and sworn to the destruction of the State of Israel, a regime that has killed hundreds of Americans, remains an implacable enemy of the United States, and is also the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world. In pursuit of regional hegemony, while under the full pressure of international sanctions, Iran has expanded its intervention in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Gaza, Bahrain, and elsewhere. Imagine what the Revolutionary Guard and Quds Force, who will be further entrenched in power by this agreement, will do with the windfall sanctions relief. Iran will provide more arms and more supplies to their terrorist proxies in the region, and more support for tyrants like Bashar Assad, whose ruthlessness in clinging to power has destroyed his nation and provided opportunities for expansion to ISIS and other terrorist forces. Despite repeated assurances to the contrary, administration officials did not restrict their negotiations with Iran to its nuclear program. They made major concessions on Iran's conventional weapons and ballistic missile programs. They agreed to lift the international arms embargo against Iran in 5 years. Russia and China and others eager to provide Tehran with the advanced conventional capabilities it desires, will likely ignore any American concerns or protests, as they routinely do today on many other issues. In 8 years, the ban on ballistic missiles will be lifted, allowing Iran to obtain systems whose purpose is to deliver nuclear weapons, while under the terms of the agreement, it is permitted to remain a threshold nuclear state with an industrial enrichment capacity. We are allowing the Middle East to become drastically more dangerous while squandering our influence there, which was already at a low ebb thanks to the administration's policies and failures to act in response to other crises in the region. Israel and other friends will face an imminent existential threat, and Iran's power and influence in the Middle East will be greater than any other regional player should it acquire ballistic missiles and then suddenly abrogate the agreement and race to develop nuclear warheads. Other powers in the region, my friends, aren't going to stand by for the next few years and watch this threat develop. They'll do what they have to do, irrespective of U.S. wishes. A nuclear arms race will likely ensue in the most volatile, terrorist-ridden region on Earth. We have put the lives of American soldiers at greater risk. By allowing Iran to develop an advanced military arsenal, our concessions have greatly increased the probable cost of a military response to Iran's violation of the agreement. Many pundits have hailed the agreement and the Democrats' obstruction of a vote in Congress on a resolution disapproving it as a great accomplishment for the president. This might sound funny coming from me, but I sincerely hope they're right. I hope this agreement proves to be a great success in the judgment of history. That would mean our worst fears weren't realized. I'm worried they will be, and the situation in the Middle East will be made exponentially worse as a nuclear arms race is added to the usual violence and instability there. Terrorist networks become stronger, better funded, and more effective. And one of our best and most important allies, Israel, confronts an existential threat that compels it to make a very hard, dangerous decision without the reliable support of the United States. I'm pretty sure, considering the nature and past behavior of the Iranian regime, that history will judge this agreement and current U.S. policy toward Iran as a catastrophe. I would be thrilled and relieved to be proved wrong. There are times when the natural optimism of Americans is challenged by exposure to inhumanity we can barely comprehend. For most of us, slavery is something we thought was eradicated in the 19th century. But human trafficking, slavery by another name, is thriving in the world today, and not just in the dark corners of Asia or other parts of the third world. It's happening in Europe and the United States. Each year, hundreds of thousands of victims, mostly destitute women and children, are sold into bondage and transported across international borders to places where they are cruelly, wickedly abused. My friends, human trafficking is an issue that should touch the hearts of all of us. I hope that you, who are best placed and best positioned to address this terrible issue which is growing, when you see the pictures of the refugee camps and the young children that are having to be sold by their families in order to live. I remember being in a refugee camp in Jordan where there was 175,000 people. And a teacher was taking me around, and she said, "Senator McCain, you see all these children here? You see all these children?" I said, "Yes." She said, "They believe you Americans have abandoned them. And when they grow up, they're going to take revenge on you. Thanks to this feckless foreign policy, we are sowing the wind, and we will reap the whirlwind. And my friends, American young men and women are going to have to be put in harm's way. And most of all, we need a new president of the United States who will lead, not from behind, but from in front." I end by telling you a very brief story that some of you have heard before. Many years ago, when I was a guest of the Vietnamese in their Hanoi Hilton, as we love to describe it as, playing volleyball and enjoying their company, we were once spent many years in conditions of solitary confinement or 2 or 3 to a cell. For some reason, after about 4 years, the Vietnamese changed our treatment and put us into cells of 25 or 30 prisoners in each cell. It was a wonderful change, as you could imagine. I'd spent, at that time, 3 years living by myself. And one of the men who moved in the cell with us was a young man named Mike Christian. Mike Christian came from a small town near Selma, Alabama. He came from an incredibly poor family. He joined the Navy when he was 17, later took advantage of a program, became an officer, and was the co-pilot in the A-6 aircraft, and was shot down and captured sometime before I was. Mike Christian had a keen appreciation for the benefits of serving a country in uniform. And as part of the change in treatment that took place, the Vietnamese allowed some of us some packages from home, which contained some articles maybe of food and some small articles of clothing. The uniform that we wore in prison was a blue short-sleeve shirt and trousers that looked like pajama trousers, and sandals made out of rubber tires. I recommend them highly. One pair lasted me 5.5 years. And Mike Christian got a piece of white cloth and a piece of red cloth from these packages and fashioned himself a bamboo needle. And he sewed on the inside of his shirt the American flag. Every evening before we would have our bowl of soup of undetermined content, we would put Mike's shirt on the wall of the cell and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Saying the Pledge of Allegiance is obviously not the most important part of our day, although we certainly are privileged to do so. But in that prison cell, saying the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag and our country was really the most important part of our day. Vietnamese routinely searched our cell. They came in one day and searched our cell and found Mike Christian's shirt with the flag sewn inside of it. That evening they returned, called for him to come outside the cell, closed the door of the cell, and beat him very badly for about 45 minutes right outside the cell, and then threw him inside. And obviously he was beaten rather badly. The cell in which we lived had a concrete slab in which we slept and a light bulb in each 4 corners of the room. We cleaned up Mike as well as we could. I went down to lie down to go to sleep, and I happened to look over in the corner of the cell, and underneath the light bulb was, of course, with his eyes almost shut from the beating that he had received, with a piece of white cloth and a piece of red cloth and his bamboo needle, Mike Christian was sewing another American flag. He didn't do that because it made Mike Christian feel better. He knew how important it was to pledge our allegiance to our flag and country. So here in Washington, from time to time, when I get a little dispirited and down and disillusioned, I think of Mike Christian, and I think of all the wonderful people who have served our country and sacrificed for so many years, and I'm filled with gratitude and love. Thank you.